All right. Respondent Dixie Ambulance would like to call Dr. Tremea.
Doctor, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Dr. Tremea, if you please state your name for the record.
Yeah, Michael Oliver, Tremea, MD.
And what is your educational background?
Medical school at University of Utah. Did emergency medicine residency through the Michigan State program in Grand Rapids. Been employed at Dixie Regional with the Southwest Emergency Physician Group for 15 years.
And as an emergency medical physician, is that what?
Yeah.
What are your responsibilities?
Well, I have been the director of the emergency department until just recently. Oversee patient care directly. Also assist with the ambulance service. We also do volunteer projects and help out with the marathon and things like that. So we're involved in the community as well as taking care of the emergency department. My emergency group is conjoined with the group that covers Cedar City. So rarely, but when needed, we'll cover the Valley View Hospital. But 99% of my work is at Dixie Regional in the emergency department.
Okay. And you mentioned you work with the ambulance provider. Who are you referring to?
Dixie Ambulance Service.
And what do you do with Dixie Ambulance?
I'm their medical control physician.
What does that mean?
I oversee ultimately patient care as they come through. I also help write protocols, do hiring and firing, disciplinary, teaching. I have a good advantage by working in the hospital. This is the only place where they bring patients, so I see runs and patients on a real time after they pick them up and they bring them in, and frequently we'll discuss what was brought in, why it was brought in, what was the care given, what was the outcome afterwards. So we have some good feedback that way.
And who do you give that feedback to?
Directly to the medics right then.
The medics of
The medic
Dixie
who brought the
Ambulance?
patient in, yeah.
Okay.
We also provide that to Hurricane Ambulance or other ambulance services too, because we teach, but I have a special interest in Dixie's outcomes, so we follow them most closely.
And what have you done to assist in protocol development?
Annually, we review all the protocols, and as needed, if something comes up and says, just recently, we decided to switch over to using fentanyl more than we use for morphine, and so we discussed the pros and cons and wrote up new protocols for it. Decided it was a more appropriate drug for most of the traumas that we had rather than using morphine, so we made the change.
What is fentanyl?
Fentanyl, it's a synthetic narcotic, so. And we've also been reviewing things like scene safeties with helicopters because it's a relatively new service, so we've been trying to work with Intermountain on scene safeties and have protocols on when to transfer patients and when to call the helicopter. So we've been going over things as they develop.
Now, you talked about assisting with the training of Dixie Ambulance paramedics. What do you do in that regard?
We have monthly meetings and we cover CME, and it's not only just for Dixie Ambulance, but we invite the fire department and other agencies to come pick up CME. So in the monthly meetings, we will review some pertinent cases. We'll discuss a topic. I recently gave an EKG lecture on interpretations, and then I'll usually leave at that point and let them do some company business and finish up the meeting.
How well do you think Dixie Ambulance paramedics are trained?
I think very well trained, primarily on the job. I don't think the world of the college program. I think that they leave some gaping holes in education in practical situations. That's why a lot of the college programs come and work through the Dixie Ambulance to get the experience that they need to be good medics.
What do you mean they work through Dixie Ambulance?
They'll do ride-alongs, and they'll be like a third-party witness and help as they're able based on their skill level, their top level. They can't go above their top level.
You mentioned earlier that you kind of have a real-time analysis of patients as they're coming in. Do you ever talk to other ER physicians about patients that Dixie Ambulance brings?
Yeah, all the time.
And in that process, what do you talk about?
They'll either come in and they'll say, hey, Dixie brought this patient in, they did a great job. Or they'll come in and say, what's your protocol on that? They brought a patient in and this is what happened. I'm like, well, I actually was following the protocol. So sometimes they don't know all of our protocols, but we explain it to them. And if they bring in something, said something was weird, I don't know about that. And I'll say, okay, well, give me the names and I'll go check it out.
Do you ever review charts?
Yes.
With your hands, I'm not going to have you get into the binders.
Okay, thanks.
But there was a letter, it's Exhibit 88, from the Southwest Emergency Physicians, where it said that Dixie Ambulance provides excellent service. Do you recall that letter at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, I've got a copy of it here.
And there's, a number of doctors that have signed that letter. Can you tell me a little bit about any conversations you had with any of these doctors about this letter?
Yeah, that was signed at the beginning of all this, so it was dated a year or so ago, but we brought it up in our department meeting and also in our partnership meetings about what we wanted to see and if we had any questions or concerns about Dixie Ambulance as opposed to another ambulance service trying to come in and take over the service. And we as a group unanimously decided that we preferred to keep Dixie Ambulance as the 911 provider in our area. And everybody agreed with it. We formulated the letter and all the partners at the time signed the letter.
And the letter said that Dixie Ambulance is knowledgeable in the EMS field, provide compassionate care to their patients, and go the extra mile to ensure quality care. You said this letter was dated a year ago. Do you still believe that?
Yes, I haven't heard any changes from any of my partners either. And actually, if you look, the partners are all covering the separate agencies in the area as medical control for, say, Colorado City, medical control for Hurricane Ambulance, medical control for Springdale Ambulance. So that's pretty much uniform across the board. The medical directors were in agreement on this.
Okay, so that's an excellent point. So where it talks about medical director, Washington County EMS, that means that particular doctor, and I'm looking at Dr. Barnett, for instance, is
Correct.
the medical control for that particular EMS
Yes.
agency.
And the county.
And the county.
He's the county EMS, yes.
Okay. And so, Dr. Simon, did I say that right? Is the medical director for Enterprise.
Correct.
And all of these doctors in that meeting got together and supported Dixie Ambulance.
Correct.
Do you have any opinion about the response times of Dixie Ambulance?
When you say response times, are you talking when the call is paged out from the dispatch to when we arrive? Or are you talking all the way in?
Let's start there.
Okay. My opinion on when the calls are dispatched to arrival of the ambulance has been very much a mix because there's been a lot of disruption at the dispatch. Got good dispatch, bad dispatch. And we don't have control over the dispatch. I know from my workings with the paramedics when I've been around them and they get the call, they say, oh, choo-choo, comes across the box, they respond immediately, and they go. And that's my experience with it. So if there's a delay, I would put that delay more on dispatch than I would on Dixie Ambulance.
And what about response times after that, bringing them to the hospital?
I think that their times are very responsive for the situations that they're in.
What do you mean?
I don't think our area can be compared to some other areas because we have lots of rural area and some urban area. So some of our urban areas take longer because it's geographically a larger distance to get there. So you can't compare a time from inner St. George that gets to the hospital in 3 minutes, looks great, to another call that's in outer St. George, which takes 15 or 18 minutes to drive in. And I also told the medics this, when you work in emergency medicine long enough, you realize that not every call needs to come in lights and sirens and put patients and public at risk. Very rarely does this make a big difference. If you've got somebody in cardiac arrest, you bet. Somebody in respiratory arrest, you bet. but the paramedics are trained to handle those situations on the scene. So that's what they should be doing. But if they're transporting a patient, I ask them to drive safely and to use their lights and sirens, but bring the patient themselves and the public in safe. So that's my call, and that's what I've advised them to do. There was just recently a other agency driving in lights and sirens with a patient who they thought had a stroke, who came through Hurricane and took out a family from Germany, killed the little girl, running through a light. I saw the patient in the ER and discharged him home. There was no need. And I think that needs to be beared in mind when you're considering scene times and run times, et cetera. It's not, fastest isn't always the best.
Now, there's been some testimony, and you haven't been here, but there's been some testimony about interfacility transfers. Gold Cross is performing some interfacility transfers for the hospital. Do you have an opinion about whether interfacility transfers are similar to 911 transfers?
They're very dissimilar.
How?
The acuity of care of the patients is so dissimilar. You're taking a stable patient in one place and moving them to a stable place in another. There's nothing to do with scene safety, and they rarely do any medications or any patient care directly. They're just transporting. They're not caring.
Have you spoken with any other physicians at DRMC about the interfacility transfers of Gold Cross?
Yes,
And what have you heard?
not good things. I personally have witnessed bad care coming from transports from the 400 East Hospital to Dixie Regional Hospital by inexperienced medics. They just aren't prepared. They don't do the volume. They don't know what they're doing. They transport patients who either are on the floor on an outpatient setting, or they transfer walk-ins that show up at that hospital without realizing that it's not the main hospital. It doesn't have an ER. So what they'll do is they'll show up there, say, I've got chest pain, and then they'll hurry and get registered, and then Gold Cross will transport them down 700 East to the hospital. And they do horrible call-ins. They rarely initiate any therapy on the way. Don't get IVs in. They barely remember to give aspirin if they remember. And granted, it's a short transport time, but I haven't been impressed at all.
So if you had to compare Gold Cross paramedics, or could you compare Gold Cross paramedics to Dixie Ambulance paramedics?
I could compare them. They're inferior. In fact, one of the employees on Gold Cross is somebody that worked for Dixie Ambulance who failed our CME standards and had to be let go.
And there's also been talk that Gold Cross doesn't actually hold a paramedic 911 license anywhere else in the state. You just mentioned volume and practice. Do you think it's important for a paramedic to practice 911 calls?
Absolutely.
And
You can't be good unless you get a certain volume of calls to be good. You have to be experienced. Now, I don't know if I should bring this up now, but I've read that they want to put 4 ambulances in the same area that we have 2 and 3. And they want to staff those 4 ambulances 24 hours a day. Our St. George call volume on average is a little over 8 patients a day. So if you're going to put 4 ambulances in an area that has 8 calls a day, that's one run per 12 hours. Seems like you're not going to get any experience that way. You're not going to be providing good care. Yeah, you'll respond fast, but that sounds like a politician's promises. It can't be kept.
do you have any sense for whether or not those 8 calls are all paramedic calls, or some of those basic EMTs, or any?
I couldn't give you the full breakdown on that. I know that there's 8 calls that they would transport on an average in a 24-hour period.
Is there anything else you think that would be important for the hearing officer to hear?
Just that I've spoken with my partners at the emergency department, and all of us are in agreement. We think the Dixie Ambulance does a really good job. We're pleased with their service. We don't want to change. We receive all the patients that come in from the areas, and we think that Dixie Ambulance provides the highest level of care of all the EMS agencies that transport. And that we think it'd be a really bad thing to have them as our lead flagship ambulance agency be replaced by an outsider. We don't want it. That's a consensus off the board from the emergency physicians.
Thank you. Nothing further at this time.